The movie begins with Snow White's magical storybook. As its pages open, they tell the tale of a beautiful kingdom ruled by a kind-hearted king and queen. They had always dreamed of having a child, but their wish took time to come true. Then one day, a fierce snowstorm swept across the land, covering everything in white. But the storm brought more than just snow. It delivered the greatest gift of all, a beautiful baby girl. Since she was born during the snowfall, they named her Snow White. As Snow White grew up, the king and queen taught her that the riches of the land belonged to those who worked for them, and that true leadership came from kindness and justice. They told her that one day she would rule the kingdom, so they showed her reflection in the water and taught her that every decision she made should be guided by courage and fairness. In their kingdom, happiness was built on hope and unity. The king and queen were incredibly proud of their daughter, who grew into a noble and generous young woman. But fate had other plans. One day, tragedy struck the palace when the queen fell gravely ill and passed away, leaving both Snow White and her father heartbroken. Some time later, a breathtakingly beautiful woman arrived at the palace. She was tall, elegant, and carried herself like royalty. However, beneath her beauty lay a dark secret. She was a powerful sorceress who used magic to keep herself young. Clever and ambitious, she took advantage of the king's grief, enchanted him, and eventually became his wife. The only things that truly mattered to the evil queen were her beauty and the power it gave her. She possessed a magical mirror that answered only one question with absolute honesty. Who is the fairest of them all? Every single day, she asked the mirror to make sure she remained the most beautiful woman in the world. One day, the queen had a vision through her magic and foresaw a great danger approaching from the southern kingdom. The king set out to confront the threat, but he never returned and mysteriously disappeared. With the king gone, the evil queen tightened her grip on the kingdom. She stripped Snow White of her royal title, forced her to live as a servant in the palace, and kept her hidden from the world. As long as the magic mirror continued to declare the queen the fairest in the land, Snow White remained safe from the queen's jealousy. Years passed, and people gradually forgot the kingdom's true princess. Many no longer remembered that Snow White even existed, and eventually, she herself began to question her own identity. As time went on, Snow White became a young woman working as a maid in the palace. One day, a young man named Jonathan sneaked into the palace to steal a few potatoes because the kingdom was suffering from severe famine, and the evil queen had been depriving the people of food. Jonathan was part of a group of forest outlaws who stole only to survive. They weren't ordinary thieves. They had remained loyal to the late king and still believed he was the kingdom's rightful ruler. When Snow White caught Jonathan, she tried to stop him, telling him that stealing wasn't the answer. She suggested he speak to the queen, or even the princess, so a fair solution could be found for the people. Jonathan laughed at the idea, convinced that the princess no longer existed because no one had seen her in years. Snow White insisted that the princess was real and that she was trying to find a way to help everyone. But Jonathan dismissed her words, saying that thinking alone meant nothing without action. Then he grabbed the potatoes and escaped. His words stayed with Snow White and inspired her to take action. Determined to make a difference, she confronted the evil queen and spoke about the importance of sharing with the people. She recalled how, when she was a little girl, her parents used to bake apple pies and distribute them throughout the kingdom as a symbol of hope and unity. The queen rejected the idea completely, calling the pies an unnecessary luxury and insisting that the people didn't deserve such generosity. To prove her point, she compared a delicate rose to a priceless diamond and declared that people don't dream about flowers, they dream about wealth. At that moment, news reached the palace that the young thief had been captured. As punishment, the queen ordered his house to be burned down, but Jonathan told her he didn't even have a home. Instead, he revealed that he was the leader of a band of outlaws who stole in the king's name. Furious, the queen ordered him thrown into the dungeon so that his screams would echo throughout the palace. Snow White stepped forward and reminded the queen that her father had always shown mercy to his people. She argued that the punishment should never be greater than the crime, that justice must always prevail, and that if her father were still there, he would have shown compassion. Her words only made the queen angrier. Rather than executing Jonathan, she chose a crueler punishment. She had his clothes stripped away and ordered him thrown into the freezing snow to serve as a warning to anyone who dared defy her. The evil queen then mocked Snow White, saying, "If you really want to help the people, go talk to them. The only thing you can offer during a war is a pie." After that, she ordered Snow White to return to her place by the well. Although discouraged, Snow White refused to give up. She began singing from the depths of her heart, pouring all her hopes into a song about a fair and prosperous kingdom where everyone could live in peace. Her voice carried like a heartfelt cry for a future that seemed almost impossible to reach. A short while later, she decided to take action. Quietly sneaking into the dungeon, she freed Jonathan and even handed him a piece of bread as a sign of her kindness. Before he could thank her, however, the guards arrived, leaving Jonathan no choice but to flee before he was caught. At the same time, the evil queen once again asked her magic mirror, "Who is the fairest of them all?" This time, the answer was nothing like she expected. The mirror declared that Snow White had become the fairest of all, her pure heart and inner beauty surpassing the queen's own beauty. Consumed by jealousy and rage, the queen decided to eliminate Snow White once and for all. She ordered her loyal huntsman to take Snow White deep into the forest under the pretense of picking apples, then kill her there. The huntsman hesitated because Snow White was nothing more than an innocent young woman. But the queen convinced him by accusing Snow White of conspiring with the outlaws and helping Jonathan escape. To prove his loyalty, she ordered him to bring back Snow White's heart in a box. The huntsman obeyed and led Snow White into the forest. As they gathered apples, he was deeply moved by her kindness and innocence. She smiled warmly at him and even offered him apples. Unable to live with the guilt, he confessed everything and urged her to run immediately. He warned her that the queen had lost her mind and would never stop until Snow White was dead. He also revealed that the queen had been hiding the truth about her father. Shocked by his confession, Snow White fled into the depths of the forest. The farther she ran, the darker the path became. Thick trees and eerie fog surrounded her, and at one point, a massive tree trapped her within its branches. She fought with all her strength until she finally broke free. Eventually, she reached a magical place deep in the forest, where a gentle deer crossed her path as if inviting her to follow. Soon, other woodland animals appeared and guided her to a tiny cottage. The cottage was incredibly small. When she stepped inside, she found no one there, but the animals led her to a room containing 7 tiny beds. Exhausted and frightened, she lay down on one of them and quickly fell asleep. Elsewhere in the forest, 7 dwarfs were happily making their way home while singing. Everyone was cheerful except Grumpy, who complained about everything, and Sleepy, who could barely stay awake. The dwarfs worked in the mines, digging up precious gems and diamonds. Despite their different personalities, they made a strong team. After a long day's work, Bashful remembered it was dinner time, so they put down their tools and headed home together, singing all the way. When they arrived at the cottage, they immediately sensed that something was wrong. They entered the bedroom and found someone sleeping in one of the beds. Startled, they scattered in every direction except Dopey, who stood frozen in fear. Snow White gently approached him and introduced herself. Before she could explain further, the other dwarfs returned carrying their tools, ready to confront whoever had entered their home. But the moment they saw her, they were stunned. They had never seen a human before. Feeling like she didn't belong, Snow White decided to leave. Before doing so, however, she told them the truth. She introduced herself, explained who she was, and revealed that the queen had tried to kill her. Some of the dwarfs felt sorry for her and wanted her to stay, while others feared the danger she might bring. At that moment, Snow White finally understood what her parents had always told her, that the forest was truly a magical place. Surrounded by these tiny creatures, she finally understood why. The dwarfs then introduced themselves: Bashful, Dopey, Grumpy, Sleepy, Sneezy, Happy, and Document. They also told her about their work in the mines. Snow White agreed to stay for just one night. Back at the palace, the evil queen once again asked her magic mirror who the fairest in the land was. The answer made her face darken. The mirror told her that Snow White, hidden deep within the forest, was still the fairest of them all. Enraged, the queen opened the box the huntsman had brought back. Instead of Snow White's heart, she found only an apple, immediately realizing that the huntsman had betrayed her. She summoned him and coldly informed him that he would be punished. Before he was taken away, he begged her to spare Snow White, but she ordered him thrown into the dungeon instead. Then she commanded her soldiers to search every corner of the forest until they found Snow White. At sunrise, Grumpy complained that Snow White's presence would only bring trouble and that they would all be doomed if the queen's soldiers found them. Soon, the dwarfs began their usual morning routine. Dopey, who was normally cheerful, had grown tired of everyone making fun of him and wandered away from the cottage. Snow White followed him and tried to talk to him, but she realized it wasn't easy to communicate with someone who lived in his own little world. Patiently, she turned the moment into a game and taught him how to whistle. A bright smile spread across his face, and his laughter lifted everyone's spirits. Snow White used that joyful moment to transform the dwarf's way of life. She showed them that work didn't have to be boring, it could actually be fun when everyone worked together. She helped them understand one another, put an end to their constant arguments, and soon they were cleaning, singing, and whistling together. She also shared stories from her childhood and memories of the happy days she spent with her parents. Then she remembered what the huntsman had told her, that the queen had lied about her father, and perhaps he was still alive. Determined to uncover the truth, Snow White told the dwarfs about the outlaws who continued fighting in the king's name, believing they might be able to help her. After thanking the dwarfs for everything they had done, she explained that she had to leave, while each of them returned to work in the mines. Snow White set off into the forest in search of the outlaws. Jonathan spotted her, recognized her immediately, and quickly hid her from the queen's guards. Once they were safe, Snow White told him that she truly believed her father was still alive and that the outlaws might be able to help her find him. Jonathan listened carefully before telling her about rumors claiming that the king was being held prisoner in the southern kingdom. He also revealed that he wasn't just an ordinary thief, he was the leader of the outlaw band. Meanwhile, the rest of the outlaws emerged from the shadows and respectfully stood before Snow White. Before they could say anything, however, a group of royal guards entered the forest after tracking Snow White down in order to bring her back to the palace. The outlaws were ready to fight to protect her, but the guards greatly outnumbered them. Thinking quickly, Snow White came up with a plan. She ran to the stables and released the horses, then climbed onto a tall rock and shouted to draw the soldiers' attention. It was all a clever distraction. The guards rushed toward her while she seized the opportunity to regroup with the outlaws. Together, they raced through the forest, weaving between the trees, leaping over fallen logs, and successfully escaping. Jonathan was deeply impressed by Snow White's courage. He confessed that he and his men had remained loyal to the king because, throughout his reign, the king and queen had never ruled through fear. Instead, they had always inspired hope among their people. As they were talking, a shadow appeared between the trees. One of the palace guards had been hiding there. He drew his bow and aimed an arrow directly at Snow White. At the very last second, Jonathan threw himself in front of her and took the arrow instead. Desperate to save him, Snow White remembered that one of the dwarfs was called Doc and assumed he must be a real doctor. She hurried Jonathan back to the cottage, only to discover that Doc was simply a nickname and that his true expertise was in rocks and minerals. The outlaws saw their leader badly wounded and begged Doc to do something. As panic spread, the dwarfs began arguing among themselves. Snow White raised her voice and reminded them that this was exactly what the evil queen wanted, to see them divided and fighting one another. She explained that the queen had poisoned their hearts with fear, making them believe they could trust no one but themselves, but that wasn't true. Her words touched everyone, and the tension quickly faded. Taking a deep breath, Doc admitted that he wasn't a real physician, but promised to do everything he could to save Jonathan. He locked himself inside the small room and crafted medical tools from whatever materials he could find. Hours later, he emerged exhausted, his hands trembling as he explained what he had done, though he wasn't sure it would be enough. Silence filled the room for a few tense moments. Then the door slowly opened, and Jonathan walked out weak but smiling. Joy instantly spread throughout the cottage. Jokingly, Doc said he had worked so hard only because of his friend Snow White, filling the room with laughter. During the celebration, Snow White and Jonathan nearly shared a romantic moment, but they suddenly realized everyone was watching them. Embarrassed, they stepped back and laughed together. That night, everyone took extra precautions to hide the cottage. Before leaving, Jonathan told Snow White that he and his men would erase all traces of their presence and return in 2 days so they could travel to the southern kingdom in search of her father. Snow White removed a small necklace that her father had given her when she was a child and placed it in Jonathan's hand. She told him it would bring him good luck and give him a reason to come back. Smiling, Jonathan held the necklace tightly and disappeared into the forest. Before he could get very far, however, a hidden trap sprang from the ground, capturing him. The guards immediately arrested him and dragged him before the evil queen. Jonathan held his head high and spoke to her with sarcasm. Mocking him, the queen greeted him by saying, "Well, if it isn't the potato thief." His smile quickly faded because the queen wasn't interested in jokes. She wanted only one thing, to know where Snow White was hiding. Jonathan denied knowing her whereabouts, but the small necklace hanging around his neck gave him away. The queen stepped closer, grabbed the necklace, and smiled coldly as she realized the truth. Filled with rage, the evil queen passed to a dark prison lined with the bones of those who had never escaped. She then entered her secret laboratory, a chamber filled with poisonous potions and swirling black smoke. With great precision, she brewed a deadly potion and drank it. Her body immediately began to transform. Her youthful beauty vanished, revealing the face of an old witch. Then she created a poison apple and cast a powerful spell upon it called the Sleeping Death Curse. Whoever ate the apple would fall into an endless sleep that could only be broken by true love's kiss. The queen was convinced that such a kiss would never happen. Meanwhile, the dwarfs left for work, leaving Snow White alone in the cottage. Disguised as an old woman, the witch knocked on the door, handed Snow White the necklace, and claimed that Jonathan had been injured and wanted to see her. Trusting the old woman completely, Snow White believed her. But before she left, the witch offered her the poison apple. The moment Snow White took her first bite, she collapsed unconscious. The woodland animals immediately rushed to warn the dwarfs that the witch had arrived. At the same time, Jonathan searched desperately for a way to escape from prison. The only person he could rely on was the huntsman. Together they came up with a clever escape plan and successfully broke free. Before they parted ways, the huntsman gave Jonathan several pieces of advice that might help him survive. Jonathan raced through the forest while the animals guided him straight to the cottage. When he arrived and saw Snow White lying motionless, his heart shattered. He fell beside her, believing everything was lost. Even so, he gently kissed her. At that very moment, a miracle happened. A brilliant light surrounded Snow White, and she slowly opened her eyes. Everyone stood in shock, while the dwarfs and the woodland animals burst into celebration. Still overwhelmed, Snow White sat up and revealed that she had finally learned the truth. Her father was dead, and it was the evil queen who had ordered his murder. Just then, a single snowflake landed on her finger, as though it were a sign that the time had come to fulfill her destiny. Her new mission was now clear: confront the evil queen, free the kingdom from fear and oppression, and reclaim the throne as the queen her people truly deserved. Then something happened that no one had ever expected. Dopey, who had never spoken before, finally found his voice and declared that he would never be afraid again. Snow White returned to the kingdom, and the people poured out of their homes to gather around her. When the evil queen heard that a rebellion had begun, she marched out to confront Snow White herself. She carried a rose in one hand and a sword in the other, sending a clear message that beauty and strength alone deserved to rule, and that if Snow White wanted the throne, she would have to take it by force. But Snow White refused to fight. Instead, she spoke to the people, reminding them of the kingdom they once had. She told them about Pedro, the royal guard who grew vegetables in the Western Valley, and his wife Elena, who planted cherry trees and shared their harvest with everyone every spring. She also reminded them of the baker who, like her father, never allowed anyone to go hungry. Snow White recalled how they had once lived in a kingdom built on kindness, justice, honor, and generosity, and that it was time to restore those values. The people's expressions began to change. They rose to their feet, not driven by hatred, but by courage, hope, and the determination to stand for what was right. Realizing that her control was slipping away, the evil queen launched one final attack on Snow White. But the outlaws arrived just in time, and one of their skilled marksmen saved her. Moments later, the dwarfs also arrived and stood alongside the people. Throughout it all, the magic mirror watched in silence. When the queen summoned it one last time, it refused to tell her what she wanted to hear. Instead, it spoke the truth. It told her that her beauty had always been only skin deep and had never reached her heart, while Snow White's beauty came from within. That was why Snow White would always be the fairest of them all. Driven completely mad, the queen screamed and shattered the magic mirror into countless pieces. In that instant, her own magic turned against her. As the mirror's shattered fragments pulled her toward them, she vanished forever. With that, the reign of a young queen who never lost faith in goodness finally began. She believed in the value of the land, the power of justice, and the love of her people. Her name was Snow White. The kingdom came back to life as the people sang, laughed, and danced together. Hope returned once more, and as the sun rose on a brighter future, The magical storybook slowly closed its pages after sharing its timeless tale with everyone. And that is the end of the movie. Thank you for watching. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so be sure to leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.